You're listening to the Hello World podcast number 13. My name is Sean Wildemuth and I'm your host. The Hello World podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. Today's guest is K. Scott Allen. He's a founder and principal consultant with Ode to Code, LLC, and the CTO of Metasolve, Inc. He has 20-plus years of commercial software development experience across a wide range of technologies. He successfully delivered software products for embedded, Windows, and web platforms. He's also developed web services for Fortune 50 companies and firmware for startups. Many of you probably know Scott from his Pluralsight courses, being a host on the podcast Herding Code, from his books, or even you may have listened to him when he's spoken at conferences around the world. I enjoyed recording the show. Scott let us know what it was like to test chocolate with software, play with MIDI on his early Atari ST, and how we both reacted to Apple owners back in the day. Take a listen. I hope you'll enjoy it. So I'd like to welcome Scott Allen to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Sean?
I'm good. So as you know, we're interested in how people get started in this business. Did you have a first computer when you were growing up?
I did. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, my parents, just out of the blue, brought home a Texas Instruments 99-4A. I had never asked for it, but this was back in the days when they used to sell computers at shopping malls, and I think they saw it and thought, hey, maybe Scott would like that or whatever, and brought it home and unpacked it, and I was off and running with my first computer.
Wow. And did you do programming, or was it just, a game machine? As much as computers back there were,
Well, yeah, the first thing I did was games. I don't remember exactly what came with it out of the box. I'm thinking there was some sort of game or something I could do interactively with it. And I know I also had some sort of word processor, but eventually I would go to the computer stores at the mall and I would buy the home computing magazines, which would always have some sort of program you could type in, basic programs, the basic language, and type them in and run them. And quite often they were games. So I became interested in what the stuff was that I was typing in and learning it a little bit.
Would you get into would you change any of the code of these games you were typing in?
Yeah, I would try different things. And sometimes I'd see something that was really neat. And I remember for a couple years, every year, I would do something for the birthdays of my family members. So I would create some sort of animation. It's kind of funny the things you remember, but I really remember for my sister, I had some sort of birthday cake that would float in as a sprite, and then a candle would pop up and it would say happy, whatever birthday. And that was all code that I had learned just from typing stuff in and trying to figure out what it actually does.
That's adorable. Just not a phrase I say to you very often. Adorable.
Yeah, that's okay. It kind of makes me uncomfortable.
Well, as long as you're uncomfortable, I think we're on the right track.
Good.
So this was just a basic interpreter, sort of the TN-89's version of, all the different basics that were floating around that day.
Right. I remember at some point, I don't know if I bought it or if it came with the computer, but an extended basic cartridge that you would plug into the computer and then you could boot into this extended basic and type in basic programs. Eventually, I actually learned assembler for that because I bought a game that came with source code, if I remember.
Nice.
I think it was called Tombstone, and it was sort of like a Space Invaders type game where you moved a little ship around and you shot at enemies and you tried to avoid or hide behind tombstones.
Oh, I see.
And I expected it to be in BASIC when I saw, there's source code to this, and I opened it up and there was all this whole new world of bizarre instructions that made no sense. And I remember buying a book on assembler, or a manual, I think it was, from Texas Instruments on the assembly language for that particular chip. And I fiddled around with that a little bit.
So you modified it to learn it, or were you, using the manual to actually write little programs?
I wanted to write little programs. In fact, I thought, well, I've typed in so many games. I kind of know how to create my own game a little bit. And I thought I'd try it in assembler because that appeared to be what the real games were written in, like this Tombstone game. And I do remember one of the first huge roadblocks I had was, okay, my game needs to compute a random number, and I don't see any instructions for computing a random number. And it was actually a crazy mental exercise. I was wandering around as like a 13-year-old kid at school thinking, man, computers, if you add 2 and 2, it always has to say 4. So how would you ever get it to do something random?
And how did you solve that?
Eventually, I had a friend of my sister who worked in computers a little bit who said, yeah, if you use all this crazy division and stuff, it will generate a somewhat random number. But I don't remember ever getting it to work, to be honest. I think it was a little bit beyond me at the time.
Yeah, the whole notion of random numbers in computers is sort of a black art that when people start to look at how random numbers are generated, it's actually a little scary.
It is. It's kind of funny because in the last couple of years, I've made a couple trips to a company that's in the gaming industry for like casino gambling machines.
Oh, nice.
And the joke is, I don't know, I was writing some demonstration program. I'm like, all right, let's compute a random number here to put a color on the screen or something. And everyone's kind of laughing at my little .NET ran.getNext function. Like, ha ha ha. It's so easy for you. It's not so easy for us.
Yeah, because, they're trying to keep people like you from, winning at the slot machines, I would guess.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just amazing the ends that people will go to try to get free money.
Yeah, when they could, just write assembler and make their own money.
That's right.
So, were you the geeky kid in high school? Now, since you got this at a fairly young age, was this what you were fascinated by as you grew up, or was this sort of a sideline?
I definitely was. And I had a circle of friends. No one else in the school had a Texas Instruments computer as far as I know, but I did have friends who had Ataris and Commodore 64s, and we all ended up in like the audio visual club and the typical nerd things like that. So definitely.
And was there, I remember, I had a VIC-20 and a Commodore 64. I remember this animosity against the kids who had Apples.
Yeah, that's true. we did have some Apples at the school, and they were strange foreign machines that were obviously inferior to
whatever you owned, right?
At least we could bond together over that. And after my Texas Instruments, I somehow convinced my parents or saved money or something to get an Atari ST.
Oh yeah.
Which then again it pitted me against like the people that were buying Amigos at the time, but we could at least all still bond together over those Apple machines at school
that didn't have lowercase. Yeah,
that's right.
I remember that being such a big deal. So with the, I remember the ST, if my memory serves me correct, was like the first one I remember that had MIDI.
Absolutely, yeah. That was one of the reasons I bought it.
Oh, really?
I was actually doing a lot of music stuff at the time. In fact, up until my senior year of high school, all my guidance counselors and things like that were putting me on a path to going to a music conservatory after high school.
Oh, nice.
And
what did you play?
I played trumpet in like the jazz band and the orchestra.
Oh, nice.
And everywhere else I could. But my senior year, I remember starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable about my future as a musician. I was pretty good at the school, but by that time I had done some stuff like at a statewide level, or actually did a tour of Europe in a band.
Oh, nice.
Teenage music band one summer that lasted like 60 days. But I started to realize that I actually wasn't as good as maybe I thought I was, just being in that small pond. And
yeah,
I knew I really liked computers a lot, and I told my guidance counselor, "No, I don't want to go to college for music. I want to go to college for electrical engineering or something computer related." They switched all my courses around that year.
Oh wow!
I got yanked out of a music theory class and put into a calculus class.
And you immediately regretted it, or?
Well, it was still fascinating.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to the point. The Atari ST had MIDI, and I remember buying sequencers, and I remember buying keyboards, and spending like all my summer savings on a drum machine and running all this stuff through my Atari ST, which was a lot of fun.
Wow. And you were, composing?
I did. I tried composing things and creating music and saving the produced song onto cassette tapes and handing it out to friends to play in their cars.
And did many of them?
Well, they said it was cool. I don't know what they really thought.
Yeah, you never know with that stuff. And so, did you go to college after high school for computers? Is that what the next logical step is?
I did. I went for electrical engineering. I thought that was going to be more interesting than something like computer software.
Sure.
Again, some of this was the arrogance of youth, and I had the same thing in high school. It's like, well, we're going to put you in this computer class, and here's the things you're going to learn: how to open a file, and this and that, and this and that. I'm like, oh, I've done all that stuff. I don't need that class. Put me in something more interesting.
That's funny.
Selecting a college major, I'm like, software development.
That's old hat.
Yeah, computer science, I guess, was the college major. But I'm like, well, I can figure all that stuff out. I want to figure out actually how to build computers. So I started with electrical engineering, but turned out I just didn't enjoy that curriculum as much, and eventually, switched over to a computer science major.
And what sort of languages were you learning in college?
Back then, there was a lot of things. There was assembly again, but this time for when I was in college, it was a mainframe, like I can't even remember the name of it anymore, PDP or a DEC something or other.
Yeah.
There was also some COBOL. There was C. I remember having a course in Pascal. And then I actually went to graduate school to get a higher degree in computer science. And I remember doing some interesting languages there, like Ada and Lisp.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And are you one of these Lisp guys who, harken back and wish we all did, a Lisp-like language?
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating language at the time, but so different from everything else that I'd learned. I truly didn't appreciate what I was learning at the time. I didn't.
Most of us don't, do we? Did you do co-op in college, or did you wait and get a first job after your graduate degree?
When I was getting my graduate degree, I had actually started working with a defense contractor for the United States Army, building software. Some of it was in Clipper. I did do a little bit of work with Clipper, but I tried to stick mostly building stuff with C.
Oh, nice. And did, how did this first job come about? Was it just you applied to a bunch of places and this is the place that was close to your house, or?
Yeah, I applied to a few places, and this was the place that appeared to be the most interesting and had an opportunity to program in C, which at that time I thought that was the language. That was the language that I liked the most. So I started there.
And did you find, when talking to a lot of people, I find that, that first job is always a bit of a surprise, the difference between what you thought you were learning how to do and what the pragmatism of delivering code on a schedule and all that was. Was that your experience?
Yeah, definitely. So many things are different in that first job than college, because now even though you might have had a team project in college, it was still, it lasts for 3 weeks. And,
right.
and in real life, it has to get done, and you have to work with these people, and you see them every day. And just the scale of the projects is so much more complex. What can you do in one college semester versus getting thrown into a project where 10 people have been working on it for 2 years, and there's just a lot more code and things to figure out.
And you have to, know that you have to work with these people for the next, year. It's not like, well, I can grit my teeth through these 3 weeks because, this guy's sort of a jerk.
Right.
Right. I'm going to be sitting next to this guy for 6 months, and
yeah. If you don't like someone's coding style in college, that's okay. You'll eventually part ways. But if you have those kind of conflicts in the workplace, it's a little more difficult.
So did you, have any mentors when in these first couple of jobs you had that changed the way you did software at all, or was it really just a place where you were slinging code?
Actually, I would say the first job, I never really found a good mentor there. There was definitely some experienced people where I could learn some things from, but I just didn't find a mentor. It wasn't until my second job, which was a little closer to home. And the ironic thing about this job is I was working for a company where I was the only developer in that building. It was a company that had 2 offices, so there was a couple other developers, but they were further away, and it's not quite like today where you could just have someone in a Skype window all day or ask them questions. But
sure.
When we did get together, they taught me a lot of really, really great things, not just about how stuff works, but about the best approach to managing source control and versions and how to do releases. Those types of things that at that time, nothing in college had really talked about those sorts of processes and tools.
It's interesting how much I find that, how much of the job isn't actually the job, right?
Right.
As a kid, I thought, if I end up doing programming, I'm going to spend, 8 hours a day and figuring out all these interesting problems. And then in my first few jobs, I was like, oh, the actual programming is like 3 hours a day, and 2 hours a day in meetings, and 3 hours a day figuring out how to, do all this other stuff, all release management and change management and spec writing and all this other, stuff that I didn't expect. And I was a little let down. I don't know about your experience there. I had always pictured being the guy in the dark room that was left alone to mix the magic potion and to bring it out when it was ready. But that's not how it worked at all when I got into the office.
No, absolutely. And for me, I had to be really careful. I was the only developer there, and if I messed up one of these release processes, it could do all sorts of damage to the business. So it kind of scared me for a while.
Sure.
I was wondering if I really knew what I was doing. Plus, I was kind of thrown into an environment where college had sort of prepared me for these things. I was writing firmware for lab instruments, so writing assembly and C code for these little 8-bit processors that ran on laboratory instruments that would turn on and turn off infrared diodes to shine light through a sample of some, usually an agricultural product. So these instruments were trying to measure the amount of protein in a wheat sample, the amount of moisture in a chocolate sample, all sorts of interesting things you can do by shining light through something.
Interesting.
And if I screwed up a program or gave someone a bad release, it could do anything from burning out the thermal printer on this device. So, you could actually assign a dollar value to how much hardware Scott destroyed today. Or it could give people wrong readings and, all sorts of crazy problems. And it was a really neat mixture of computer programming and statistics because we had to run all sorts of algorithms on the measurements that we got back. And that was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoy statistics, and I haven't had an opportunity since then really to apply a lot of statistical algorithms.
Interesting. With all the big data becoming such a big deal, it seems like there's more opportunity now than there certainly was when I started, when, we didn't have the computational power to do anything really interesting.
Right. Yeah, and that's funny you should mention that, because I remember I would try to implement things like a multiple linear regression in C, because, of course, C is a lot easier to write than assembler.
Sure.
But finds out that when you actually put that on this little CPU, that might run for 8 seconds. Whereas if I took that algorithm and wrote it in assembler, it would be like half a second or 1 second.
Wow.
It was a pretty dramatic difference back then.
And was this also a Defense Department company?
No, this was a commercial company that is, I believe, still around. That they manufacture these devices that they sell to farmers and to companies like Hershey's that produce things that they want to be able to measure the quality or the moisture, the protein. Yep.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Well, I had a job in medical software, and my biggest fear was that a bug we wrote was going to kill somebody.
Yeah.
There's that real, you ordered, extra strength aspirin, and we gave you, something you were allergic to, and,
Yep.
Luckily, nothing bad ever happened, but there was always that fear that, we're no longer just writing sales stuff. We're writing stuff that, could actually harm people.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Well, and that's funny you should mention that. So I didn't work on this particular product, but that company I worked for that made these devices, the other wing of the company focused more on medical applications of the same technology. So we were focused on sort of agriculture, and we always had chocolate and cheeses and greens around the office. And the other part of that company that was a couple hours away down the road, other side of DC, would use the same thing to try to measure body fat. And one of the products that they put together was this thing that they kind of have them today, where you walk into a drugstore or something and you'll see one of those machines. It'll take your heart rate. Mm-hmm. But it was a little more involved than that. You would sit in the seat and it would try to measure your heart rate and your body fat. And then you actually slid your arm through a bladder and it would try to take your blood pressure the old fashioned way, by inflating this bladder, and it constricts your arm and measures, whatever you do to take a blood pressure measurement. But I distinctly remember them bringing this to our office and trying it on different people. And I'm thinking, I know the guy who wrote the software behind this. And
I'm not sure I want my arm in it.
Well, I know he's really good.
Oh, okay.
But as that thing starts tightening around my arm, there's that brief moment of fear of, oh my God, what if it goes into an infinite loop? What if it locks up? What if I lose my arm in the process?
That's funny. That's funny. So how did you get into doing what you're doing today with training? Obviously the Pluralsight courses, but my impression is that for some amount of time you were doing face-to-face training too.
Yeah, it all started a bit by accident. I've always enjoyed writing, and once around 1998 or so, I thought, well, it would be really cool to start trying to write some things. At that time, we didn't really have the concept of blogs, and I never really thought about putting up a website. I just wanted to write for like a magazine.
Sure.
Have something in print. So I started writing, and then as things like blogs developed, I would launch a website and have a blog and write articles there. Eventually, it was Fritz Onion from Pluralsight who contacted me and said, would you like to do training for Pluralsight? This is back when Pluralsight didn't have a video library. All they did was face-to-face classroom training.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, there were some other companies that approached me too. And to be honest, I was a little bit too scared to say yes to any of them. I thought it would be a really difficult job to stand in front of people and try to explain something to them.
Mm-hmm.
But Fritz talked me into at least trying it out, and
he is persuasive.
Yes, he is. And I did a little test with him at one of his classes, and it's been all uphill since then, downhill since then. I mean,
one of the two.
Yeah,
one of the two.
But I do enjoy training a lot, and I found that when I actually sit down to prepare training materials on a given topic, I end up knowing that particular subject a lot better than if I were just programming it in it day to day, because I start to explore a lot of the edge cases and actually reading through the documentation, trying to find things and discover, this thing I've been using in my software this way, I could have actually been using it this way too. It's really kind of interesting to cover a topic that way. And now I think I don't know what the word is, but even today, if I'm approaching a new framework or library or language or whatever it is, I almost take this approach of, I'm going to learn this so I can explain it to someone else. I might not ever explain it to someone else, but I still take that same approach to learning it before I start using it in my software.
So you can really, get that deep understanding.
Right.
I found when I was doing more face-to-face training, less video training, that it was sort of an evolutionary process where I would understand it to a certain level so I could teach it. But the first, 10 times I would teach a particular course, the questions that were coming back to me were ones that would really inform how I would eventually teach it. It would take this number of teaches to really, figure out some of the minutia that either I decided wasn't important, or the stuff that I thought was important, was something I didn't have to, spend 2 hours on. I could spend a half an hour on. And the problem of how to teach it was a really interesting problem. It wasn't just, here's, 34 facts and let's walk through them one after another. It was much different than I expected it to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The topics that I have taught multiple times to groups of people, they've gotten pretty well refined at this point. And because I've gotten a lot of feedback from the groups that I've taught, and I understand what types of questions they're going to ask, and in a lot of cases I can anticipate those now, or I can tell a story in a more interesting way because I know what the common questions are going to be.
Sure. The real problem was to resist the temptation to edit the course after every time I taught it. Yeah, there was one particular course that I taught probably 120 times over the 4 years, and there's still the temptation. I come back and went, well, there was some guy didn't like this one little thing, and okay, I should go rewrite this whole section, and to leave it alone, going, because one person out of the 1,000 you taught didn't like it doesn't mean you have to change it again.
Right.
That's one of the problems with video training is once it's done, it's
yeah, it's done.
Yeah, hopefully, because of the amount of effort. So do you continue, what part of it do you prefer today? Do you prefer the writing of code or the training, or do you like that you're sort of in the middle of both?
I think I do like that I'm in the middle of both. I do know when I go off and I teach a class for like 3 days or 4 days, that by the end of that class, I'm done. Like I don't want to do training again for weeks. I want to go back to an office and write code or work on something.
Interesting.
But after, a month, 4 to 6 weeks, I kind of get that urge to, it'd be kind of nice to go someplace else and see different faces and teach them something. So it's a variety.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting.
But I could do coding full time. I'm sure of that. I could never do training full time. I find it exhausting, and just at the end of the week, at the end of a class, I'm so completely drained that I usually take like a 14-hour nap.
It is particularly, draining, more than most other things I've done, and it's very different from a conference talk.
Oh, yeah.
So what drives you to look for, a new opportunity work-wise these days, or maybe not even these days when you started? Mm-hmm. When you decided to go from one job to another, was it a new experience you were looking for? Was it getting out of a bad experience you were looking for? How does that work for you?
I would say definitely in the past, I was always looking for a new experience. So the first job was with a defense contractor. I can't say that I enjoyed it immensely. Mm-hmm. it was a very...
Because you're not allowed to say it, or...
Right. It felt like a slow pace. And looking back, it was definitely a slow pace.
Sure.
I wanted to work with a company whose purpose in life was to make software. That was one of my first things. That's why I went to the second job where, yes, they were building hardware products, but, it was really hardware plus software equals product.
Sure.
And so that's what interested me about that one. And then I stayed at that job for a long time, at least 6 years, I think.
Wow.
But in 1998, there was all this internet stuff going on. And I thought, maybe I need to find a job where I can do internet stuff. Mm-hmm. And so my third job was an internet startup just outside of DC, where that was my first exposure really to Microsoft technologies at that time. Previously, I was all just C and assembly and C compilers, and it really didn't matter what chip it was on. And yes, I used Windows as a consumer just to run like Borland tools back then.
Sure.
But now that job, we were building an internet site using ASP.
Classic ASP.
Classic ASP running on IAS using ultimately SQL Server, like SQL Server 7 or something like that. But we actually went through a couple different databases. We started with a database called Object Store, which was an object-oriented database.
I actually used that for about 2 months years and years ago. I didn't think anyone else had ever heard of it. Wow.
And back then it was at least with C++, so it was kind of gnarly.
Yeah. That was my memory.
Yeah. So we moved to a relational database, which was Oracle, and then eventually SQL Server, just because Oracle was at that time, a little more difficult to work with for Microsoft tools. Plus it was expensive.
Sure.
But anyway, so I did the internet thing for a while. That company got venture capital. We were doing pretty well for a while, but eventually it all fell apart. We went out of business.
Which was what happened to everyone in 98, 99. So.
Yeah. But I have to tell you that if you ever go to work for a big company that goes out of business or like lays off an entire development staff, don't feel bad about it. It's probably going to be one of the best things that ever happens in your career, I think.
What came out of that for you then?
So, we built up, I think, one of the best engineering teams I've ever worked with during those years. Nice. We were alive from about 1998 to 2001. End of 2001 is when it all shut down. But at the end, at our peak, we had about 100 engineers and 50 testers, and I think the engineering group was about 200 people.
Wow.
So when that thing goes belly up, all of a sudden there's 200 people that that are now spreading throughout the rest of the community or the state or the country, all going to interesting jobs. And to this day, I still rely on contacts from that workplace. Like just a few months ago, the company I'm with now, spending most of my time with now, we realized that we were starting to have a problem with configuration management. Yes, we have source control, we have builds, and everything's labeled and version and all that's working, but it was some steps beyond that and automating things and trying to figure out how to break down components. And anyway, I said, I know the perfect guy for this. I used to work with him in the year 2000, and it turns out he's still doing contracting. We brought him in. And there's just a whole network of people that I know from that experience now that I can help them find jobs, or they could help me find a job. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's I went through a number of those in Boston during the 90s when, everyone was building a new company, building it up, and then watching it, succeed or fail. And when 9/11 happened, the company I was with, shut down in Oregon, and I went back to Boston where, all of that had happened for me because I knew that there were, all these contacts, and, whereas I'd moved out to Oregon for this job, and I had none of those contacts out there that I needed, and so I totally get that. Once you've worked with these people, you get this sort of tree of great people. Assuming you haven't burnt bridges.
Right. Yeah, don't burn bridges.
Hopefully, none of us do. But
what if anyone out there ever gets works for a company that has to shut down or something? I think you'll be able to look back on it as a positive experience in the long term.
Absolutely.
At least that's how it was for me.
Absolutely.
And it's funny because the job I took after that actually was someone who had founded that company, started up a new venture, and completely switched directions. He was going into the gaming world.
Oh, nice.
So he was put together a company that was we wanted to build the infrastructure for massively multiplayer online role-playing games. This was about 2002.
That's a challenging arena to get into.
It is. What's funny about those two companies is they were both a little bit ahead of their time. So this company I'm talking about now that was in the gaming world wanted to build this, like I say, it was basically going to be a server-side framework and some client-side pieces too, that if you wanted to build an online role-playing game, you could license this product just like you could license a physics engine or something like that for your gameplay on the screen. You could license this engine and you would have all the infrastructure you would need to communicate messages across all the clients and have people authenticated and logged in. And it was really quite exciting, but it was just a little bit ahead of its time, perhaps.
Yeah.
And so two things happened. One is we were struggling to get people to work with us. And two was the people who did want to work with us and or invest in us wanted us to be on the West Coast. And I didn't want to be on the West Coast, number one. I've kind of grown deep roots in the state of Maryland. And number two was I found out that the gaming industry is kind of incestual in a way. When a gaming developer meets another developer, the first question they'll ask is, what games have you worked on? So we had all these people coming into our company who, this guy actually worked at Atari. He actually, built things I've heard of, like this, a Star Wars game, and worked on worked on the Amiga, actually, and things like that. And all these people were coming in and they would look at me and, what games have you worked on? Well, none.
I tested the protein content of chocolate. Does that count? Yeah.
Exactly. But it was still a really fun experience there. So it was a little bit ahead of its time. And actually the company before that, the one that went out of business, a little bit ahead of its time too, because we were working in the financial industry. We wanted to build what we were calling the eBay of mortgages.
Oh. So
have banks be able to upload pools of mortgages that they wanted to sell and have other people bid on those mortgages and take them. So this is 1999. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that was the business that really accelerated like 2004 through 2008. Banks trying to sell mortgages that Freddie and Fannie wouldn't buy to other banks. And, it all imploded in 2008. But back when we were trying to build an electronic platform for that, it was just a little bit too early and people weren't comfortable going to a website and saying, oh yeah, I'll bid $1 million for these 100 loans.
Yeah. Why would you do that over the web? That's
exactly.
I remember that, I'd never put in my credit card number into a website in 1997. That's crazy. Who would trust that?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But if you're on Wall Street and someone from JP Morgan takes you out to a bar and gets you liquored up, then you're willing to open the checkbook. So,
well, that's still my policy. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great story.
I'm glad you enjoyed that. I'm always happy to reminisce.
Well, you have a great day out